In the area of big tech, we've got some news from Google, and we're going to talk about what are the implications for local publishers, especially those on Our Hometown ad network, which of course uses AdSense. So Tyler, would you walk us through this one and what are the take-home points?
So this is really high level, mostly investor focused stuff towards the end. But I think the big thing to look at is all of Google's ad revenue trended way upwards in the last quarter of last year.
Okay.
And a lot of it even beat projections. So that's my first big takeaway point.
Okay.
But then towards the end, it kind of tweaks the framing here and explains why that might be. The reason that it did so well was because Google gets its own data direct.
Right.
And wasn't as impacted as other sources were from those iOS changes that we've been talking about for what seems like forever.
Absolutely. Right. For anyone that's just tuning in for the first time or doesn't know what we're talking about, the iOS privacy changes, probably all seen it when you update your apps. It's going to ask you, are you willing to let us track you across the internet? And that's what's called a first party cookie. So they want to do that so then they can serve ads to you or change the app experience somehow. But it's becoming first party without these third parties in the middle. And traditionally, the third parties have been Meta, Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat. But I mean, this is also part of the argument against Google in their antitrust situation because they control the whole environment. They're publishers and advertisers. They're controlling the advertising market, and then they're running those ads on YouTube and on Google search. But the point is they control the relationship with the audience. And as I keep saying, I think this is a good opportunity for publishers in general because they're more like Google than they are like Facebook and these other third parties in the sense that they are building a first party relationship with the subscribers. They're not collecting data in this background way without the readers knowing about it. Everyone opted in to have cookies put on their browser at one point, but it's so vague and the terms of service are so long, you don't even know that you're doing it. So the legislation is fighting against Meta and Facebook, and this is kind of the result. I mean, so it's interesting that Google is less impacted by this. I mean, they're already the leader in this space. I mean, they got to be the biggest of all these companies mentioned here, except for maybe Apple. So they're going to continue to get stronger, but I'm thinking that local news publishers could take advantage of this trend.
And towards the end, it even mentions that there is legislation in the works to try and limit Google's ability to promote their own content and sources. I think the big takeaway I would take from all of this is, A, here are the reasons why you're seeing all these stories about Google having such a good year. It's because this hasn't hit them yet. And B, this does show that the advertising money is there and might be more available for smaller outlets to capture in the future.
That's a really interesting big picture article and very financial and tons of numbers. But if we just look at what does this mean? What is the trend behind this? So that actually is a nice segue. I want to open it up again. Anyone else that has any comments on this article?
It's not about this article per se, but I've been doing some other reading, but it's basically how the iOS privacy and security features are skewing some of the data that we've been using. So if someone gets a promotional email, newsletter email via their phone, what Apple's new privacy thing is doing is it's actually preloading images and things in the background.
Yeah.
And I think Gmail is starting to implement this as well. But what that's doing is it's returning false opens to the email tracking.
Oh, wow.
And so one of the big things we're going to have to start looking at, and I've got some coverage on this about how the funnel works from getting them to open to they click on a story versus they're all the way down at the bottom of the newsletter and they click some interaction there. We're going to need to shift how we judge our analytics on newsletters because these privacy features are going to affect how that data is skewed.
Wow. Yeah, I was not aware of that. So it's almost like the rug is going to start getting pulled out from publishers. If they do start getting this inaccurate data, they may think it's real, but this pro-privacy movement is going to be slowly taking away any kind of effectiveness that they have with their newsletters, and they won't even know it. We should definitely learn more about that one. Is that a really prominent thing? Because if publishers are starting to see increasing open rates and they...
Actually, the article I was reading said once that went in, some of the open rates would go up like 40%.
Where?
And it's completely phantom. And so they recommend that you just not quite ignore, but don't use that as a primary metric. Use the deeper engagement with the newsletter to actually see what engagement is.
Well, you got your stats on your website, and that's first party data, and you should be able to see when that's coming from a newsletter. It might mean that you need to use tracking links, but usually we can tell when it's a direct entry from a newsletter. Today in News Tech, the podcast covering innovation in digital journalism. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and subscribe on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast apps. We'll see you tomorrow.
At our hometown, we help newspapers build WordPress websites, design native apps, and develop digital subscription models. If you are interested in a free prototype of your publication on WordPress, go to ourhometown.com and click the Contact Us button.